Hi everyone and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel Rightside Blonde. For today's episode, I wanted to read a story from JFK Jr., an intimate oral biography written by his executive assistant, Rosemarie Terrenzio, and also Liz McNeil. I had the pleasure of meeting both ladies at a George Magazine anniversary party back in July of 2024, and they are both amazing people. You can tell that they really respect JFK Jr. and his legacy, and it was just lovely to meet them. So if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it, JFK Jr., an intimate oral biography, and also Rosie's other book called Fairy Tale Interrupted, both great books. So let's see what this story is about. This is chapter 17, and I just want to read the first couple excerpts from this. I think it's just a fun story. It's called Meet Me at the Carlyle, the two most famous people on the planet. In December 1995, John met Princess Diana at the Carlyle Hotel in New York City. Separated from Prince Charles since 1992, Diana was 34 and at the height of her celebrity. She had done her bombshell interview with the BBC, the sit-down where she alluded to her husband's affair with Camilla, just a month before. Rosie said, John wanted to ask Princess Diana to be on the cover of George, to dress up as an American historical figure. We just hadn't decided who yet. He wrote her a letter. She was going to be in New York, staying at the Carlyle, and her private secretary, Patrick Jeffson, and I arranged for them to meet on a weekday afternoon. There was all this worry. Should he go in the front door? Should he wear a disguise? Because won't there be rumors that he's having an affair with her? John decided to just have Effie drive us over in John's Saab. John said, Rosie, come with me. If I go in by myself and leave by myself, if anyone sees me, there's going to be all kinds of speculation. You know, they were caught at the Carlyle. They were the two most famous people on the planet. He wore a navy blue suit, nothing extravagant, not full-tilt boogie JFK Jr., but on the cusp. I waited in the lobby. He entered through the front door because all the paparazzi were waiting at the side door for Diana. He went right in without being noticed. Patrick Jeffson, Princess Diana's private secretary, said, My recollection is that John wrote to me and it was obviously all based around George. I showed that to Diana, and she was keen on the idea of meeting him, or interested anyway. We discussed the magazine cover, and my suggestion was that she should not do it because it would look kind of unclassy. It would look as if she was endorsing the project. There were, at the time, quite a few magazines, sort of startups, and magazines are pretty dodgy territory. So if George is a huge success, it shouldn't be because of who John has on the cover. It should be because it's a really good magazine. That was why we thought she would do the 20th or the 50th or the 100th issue or something. But the message was clear. You make a good job of the magazine, and I'll think about it. We were to be in New York anyway for the Humanitarian of the Year award. I think it was the United Cerebral Palsy Charity of New York. And this was a big bash at the Hilton where Henry Kissinger and Colin Powell and Rupert Murdoch and every kind of supermodel you can imagine were attending. We agreed that she would find time in her program in New York to meet him. Nobody wanted it to be public. It was never made public. So that made it quite fun, actually. Diana wanted it to be discreet because it had all the makings of a great gossip story, didn't it? World's most eligible bachelor, wasn't he at the time? And she had just got unmarried or was in the process of getting unmarried. It would have been a rather intriguing thing to dream of. She didn't want that, but she was curious to meet him. Partly, I think, because Sarah Ferguson had the hots for him, and Diana wanted to, I think, do one up on her. So anyway, I was hanging around the lobby of the Carlyle at the agreed time, and we actually met outside Bemelman's bar in a rather dark passageway that goes through to the front foyer. He dressed up for the occasion, you know, he was smart. And she was smart. It was a working meeting, business attire. We introduced ourselves, and I took him up in the elevator to the penthouse, and we sat down, and I think I had tea and or champagne. He was quite in awe of her. Not uncomfortable, but he certainly seemed to be on his best behavior. He rather sat on the edge of his chair and looked nervously at her. She was not nervous at all to meet him. She was very cool and jolly, you know, and smiley and welcoming. And he did his pitch. He showed her some mock-ups, and she gave me a look and said, well, you know, this is all very nice, John. Thank you. But I hope you'll forgive me if I don't take up the opportunity this time, but would love to maybe for your 50th or your 100th issue or something. He accepted that without fuss. And then, as I recall, we continued chatting about various other things, probably the award dinner. Once it seemed that the time was up, this was a pretty well-practiced thing that she and I had. We would have agreed beforehand how long we would give it, and I would say something like, sorry to interrupt, but we've got to get ready for the next thing. And John then got up and I escorted him downstairs, and that was it. They shook hands. He He called her Your Royal Highness and Ma'am. After the meeting, she said words to the effect of, "That went well, and it was the right thing to do." She didn't say, "What a hunk," or "beefcake," or anything like that. I can't remember the words, but there was a degree of sympathy. I think she might have spoken about the famous picture of him as a little boy, and she had sympathy for him growing up with the name and being the object of public fascination. These were things that she could relate to. I definitely picked up a sense of sympathy, of concern for him. She didn't see him as the rest of the world saw him, as this big, famous, handsome guy. She saw him, I think, as rather vulnerable because he had grown up in public. She would often say that about people. Sometimes, to my surprise, she would see a vulnerability in them, and she would see where their lives were difficult when most other people would only have seen privilege and opportunity. It was an attempt to see challenges that they had overcome, difficulties that the world didn't see. I would probably say that this would have been in her mind when she was talking of John, that he was always having to be careful, people taking advantage of him, as people were often trying to take advantage of her. And indeed, on this occasion, he was trying to take advantage of her, but in a nice way. I think she saw in him a fellow victim, if you can put it that way, of life in the public eye and difficulty of knowing who to trust. And I think that that did create a connection between them. I wouldn't call it a bond, but an affinity, a recognition of each other's unusual hardships and difficulties. She didn't comment on his looks, which is probably an indication of how she very much saw the inner person. She was used to being judged by her looks and therefore didn't have much time for it. The fact that she wrote to him afterwards, I think, confirms the fact that she did feel a connection and an empathy for what the media were like for him. Matt Berman said, "We sent him over with a bunch of covers. I would draw sketches, magic marker on tracing paper. I did one of her in a limousine with paparazzi flashbulbs. It was her in the back with the windows half up. How weird is that?" They were both not going to be around in the next few years. Who would have called that one? Gary Ginsberg said, "I remember he came back and I was giving him shit, because at that point everybody knew that she and Charles didn't have a relationship. I just remember making fun of the fact that it was the princess and the prince having their first sit down together." Rosie said, "Afterwards, I remember him saying, 'She's much taller than I thought, and she's got great legs,' and that she was very shy, very polite, but she said no. On the way back to the office, I asked if he got lucky, and he started laughing and said, 'Shut up, Rosie.'" They stayed in touch, and he asked her again for an interview. On February 3rd, 1997, she wrote John a note from Kensington Palace. I still have a copy of it. She thanked him for his letter and a few copies of George he had sent over. She said regrettably she must decline his offer and that she would get back in touch when the time was right. At the end she wrote, "I hope," and she underlined hope, "the media are leaving both you and Carolyn alone. I know how difficult it is, but believe it or not, the worst paparazzi are here in Europe." So that was chapter 17 of the book JFK Jr., an intimate oral biography, all about the time JFK Jr. met Princess Diana at the Carlyle Hotel in New York City. And I will say it again, if you haven't read this book, you should definitely check it out, JFK Jr., an intimate oral biography by Rosemarie Terrenzio, one of JFK Jr.'s most trusted friends and co-workers, and Liz McNeil, who works for People. That does it for this episode of the George Collection. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I will see you next time.
And they were going to talk about how do we put this online and how do we get this, digital. So yeah, it was on its way, but there are plenty of others that we have now that have taken up the mantle. So thank goodness for that.
Of this extraordinary magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process. And while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.